All right, that's better. All right, welcome Dr. Tim to the Biohacker Babes. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Lauren and Renee, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, excited for this one. We had the pleasure of being on your podcast a couple months ago, the Boss Body podcast. We had a great time chatting, and now we get to reverse roles. We get to pick your brain today. So, Dr. Tim, you've been in the space a long time. You've been a biohacker doing some really cool stuff in holistic health, alternative medicine. So, we're going to pick your brain on a lot of things today, but we wanted to try and narrow in on women's health, hormones. This is a big topic. We're getting a lot of questions from our listeners about this today. And there's a lot of root causes. We were chatting about this a little bit before we hit record. And so we want to get to like, what do women need to know about their hormone health and dysfunction and where they can start maybe before they jump into bioidentical, some other options. So I think to kick us off, if you can maybe pick, what would you say is the biggest hidden root cause of hormone dysfunction in women today?
Chronic inflammation, so that begs the question, okay, well, what's causing the chronic inflammation? And in my experience, it's rarely just one thing. It's a multitude of things outside of trauma situations and acute care situations. So anything from gut dysbiosis to stealth pathogens we were discussing earlier, creating inflammation, and now the phrase cytokine storm is kind of popular from the past 3 or 4 years. So that can create inflammation and derail your hormones. Ultimately, we're looking at cortisol and insulin. They kind of do this intricate dance. And if we're creating chronic inflammation, we're raising cortisol, which will raise blood sugar. And then our body produces insulin to try and lower it. And so, insulin resistance, the more insulin sensitive you are, the healthier you're going to be, not just metabolically, but also cognitively. So things like Alzheimer's are colloquially referred to as type 3 diabetes. So basically insulin resistance in the brain. And one of the most common causes of that are something called lipopolysaccharides, little portions of the cell wall from gram-negative bacteria in the gut from some of the bad guys. And they create systemic inflammation, but they can also punch holes into the blood-brain barrier and lead to insulin resistance there. So when we talk about hormones in general, if you want to balance your hormones as a whole, looking at lifestyle, environment, mindset, nutrition, and decreasing inflammation. So we want to balance out cortisol and blood sugar first, and as well as insulin, and then look at the sex hormones afterwards. And just to give you an example, if you jump to say prescribing thyroid, let's just say Armour thyroid for someone who has low cortisol, oftentimes they will have to experience heart palpitations. And so I used to work in a practice where one of the providers just handed out Armour thyroid like candy to everyone, and people would be on 3 up to 4 grains of Armour. And then when I would see them, they would be like, "Oh, well, I'm having heart palpitations. My resting heart rate is like 130." Like, well, yeah, that's a problem. So, yeah,
Jeez.
to
Yeah.
answer your question, inflammation, before we jump to hormones, hormones are sexy, right? And they're anti-aging, so people want to jump to those. But if you put hormones in a body that is super toxic and super inflamed, you don't have good nutrition or a good circadian rhythm, you won't get the results you need. And you may, in fact, feel worse.
Hmm.
Yeah, I agree. And there's so many lifestyle things that contribute to that. And you're right, the hormones are so downstream. So I feel like we could just talk about inflammation for this entire podcast, but
Mhm.
such a big topic. And you mentioned LPS, which may be a new term for a lot of our audience. I would love to dig into that. I think LPS is fascinating because it is the actual compound they use in mouse models to test for drugs for Alzheimer's, neurodegenerative conditions, like a lot of our chronic diseases. They're injecting it because that is the thing that drives chronic inflammation. Yet not a lot of us are talking about it, understand it. I don't think it's largely being talked about in functional medicine space. So if that is like so clearly being used in research, what do we need to know about it as consumers and health advocates?
Yeah, so gut health, a lot of people, they know gut health is important, but they may not know the exact details as to why. So let's just take the cardiovascular system and cardiometabolic dysfunction. So lipopolysaccharides I wrote an article back in 2013 or 2014 for Huffington Post called 5 Reasons You Can't Lose Weight. And I cited all these references talking about how inflammatory cytokines, which are just cell signaling molecules for the listeners, release in response to inflammation, but they damage insulin receptors. And so if you damage insulin receptors, you're not going to be able to balance blood sugar, and therefore your body composition won't be what you want it to be. So gut health, it plays a role in terms of how we process our macro and micronutrients, but also in terms of releasing certain things into systemic circulation. And one of those inflammatory compounds is LPS, or lipopolysaccharides. And you're exactly right about it causing massive inflammation. In fact, there used to be a test from a functional medicine lab, hasn't been available for 5 or 6 years, but it was a stimulated cytokine test. And what they would do is put the cells in a petri dish and then infuse the inflammatory cytokines to look for their reaction. So right there, if they're using it for that test to see, how much inflammation can be produced, imagine what it's doing in your arteries. Okay. And so it's a major cardiovascular risk factor because remember, only 11 to 12% of the cholesterol we ingest through our diet is actually showing up on blood. The rest is produced in response to inflammation. So, there's maybe 5 to 10 cardiologists in the US who look at gut health and things like stealth pathogens. But the lipopolysaccharides, they can create everything from brain fog to insomnia to metabolic dysfunction and even joint pain.
Hmm. So if someone is interested in optimizing their hormones, now you mentioned starting with like cortisol, blood sugar, would you start with some kind of testing? Do you do the Dutch? Do you do a CGM? Like, where do we get started?
Yeah, so if cost is an issue, I would tell people let's do the Dutch test first. And so, if let's say someone's cortisol comes back as really low across the board, well, so that means at some point it was high, right? And then it dropped to low because, the glands get exhausted, for lack of a better term. But we don't know what's causing it to be high or low. And again, it's never just one thing, but the gut dysbiosis, not going to bed on time, not getting morning sunlight, non-native EMFs, too much simple sugars or simple carbohydrates, not enough exercise or resistance training, stress of any kind, stealth pathogens, mold toxicity, since that creates massive inflammation. I would start there. And if someone has imbalances in the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, we need to support it in order for the person to achieve optimal wellness. Now, it's not optimal to need to support it constantly, like for the rest of your life. But the reality is, we live in a world where we're exposed to toxins and stressors every day, more than our ancestors could have ever had. And so I think a little support long term is warranted. I don't think you need to be on 97 supplements a day to support your cortisol levels. But if they're already in balance, we do need to address those. And then we have to put our detective hat on and look at your composition of your gut microbiome. So, do you have any pathogenic bacteria? Do you have an insufficiency dysbiosis where you don't have enough of the good guys? Are you not producing enough stomach acid? So the pH changes the behavior of the bugs. A lot of bacteria, they're not inherently good or bad, but their behavior changes based on the pH. Are you not absorbing fats? So if we're not absorbing the fats we eat, they're going to sit around and putrefy, and then the pathogens are going to feed on those. So Dietrich Klinghardt has a saying, if you're not feeding ourselves, we're feeding the bad bugs.
What
Love
kind
Dr.
of
Klinghardt.
Yeah, what kind of gut tests are you talking about? Is there a specific one that looks at all that?
So there's a couple I like. GI map, they all have pluses and minuses. I like the GI map, and then the Biome FX is also pretty good. The ones that I typically don't like are the culture-based tests. And people get upset when I say this, but the reality is you can't culture an anaerobic microbe in an aerobic environment. So it leads to a lot of false negatives. And I know a lot of people still use them, but just because a lab offers a test doesn't mean it's, legitimate and accurate, sensitive and specific. And so, yeah, I think the GI map, it can give you an idea of inflammation in the gut lining. And now it can also tell us about species or a genus and species like Akkermansia mucinophila, which we know plays a major role in metabolic health. So I know plenty of people who've optimized their body composition and gotten into single digit body fats, not by taking um, body fat reducing supplements or fat loss supplements or stimulants, things like that, but by decreasing their inflammation and optimizing the composition of their microbiome.
Yeah, I think it all
Powerful.
comes back to the gut. And I agree. I think the GI map is awesome. I mean, they're all kind of flawed, but it's the best technology that we have at the time. But I do like that GI map has the clinical biomarkers of GI inflammation and digestion, because most people do have compromised digestion, right? Like you mentioned stomach acid already, and that's something we can get from blood chemistry. But if we're going to kind of circle back to chronic inflammation and maybe LPS circulating in places where it shouldn't be, potentially the root cause driver is a leaky dysbiotic gut. So how do we even get there? Like, how do we really simplify this for people so they're not like, oh my God, I have to go out and do all the tests and I have to live in a box? How are we getting this leaky dysbiotic gut by living in the world that we live in today in the first place?
So stress, stress, and stress. But let's define stress,
in priority.
Right? So yeah, exactly. So you can be a multimillionaire and spend your days on the beach drinking those little drinks with the umbrellas in them, whatever they're called, and still be stressed because your internal physiology is awry, right? And so cortisol goes up. Cortisol will thin the lining of the gut, and the gut lining, we know that there's only one cell layer of thickness that separates us from the external environment, right? Because remember, our GI tract is outside of us technically. So, yeah, I would say that we get there to the leaky gut part by stress because it thins the gut lining and it lowers the guardian of that gut lining called secretory IgA. And we have secretory IgA not just in our gut, but in our nasal cavity, lots of other places. And it's our first line of defense. And cortisol will lower that. Candida yeast can also lower that. It basically chops it in half like an axe. And so that lowers our immune defenses. And so the gut can also get leaky from eating the same foods over and over. And I'll be the first to admit I'm very bad about this. I have to work very hard at it. I tend to find foods that I like because it's not, all that easy, at least where I am, finding the healthiest food. So when I do, I'm like, oh, I'm going to eat it over and over and over and over and over. But then that creates a sensitivity because your immune system does a great job at learning, but a terrible job at unlearning, right? And so if you look from, okay, let's say I ate a food right now, it's going to take about 4 days for my body to fully process and excrete that out. And so with all that being said, you can have great gut flora and very little stress in your life. But if you experience a stressful event, the loss of a loved one, loss of a job, etc., then that will create a dysbiotic and leaky gut.
But if we can recover from that stress, then the gut can also recover. The problem is most of us live in a state of chronic chronic stress triggers. So I don't know. How else can we help people not be stressed? It's like easier said than done. We get stressed talking about stress.
Exactly. There's so many ways to go about it. But one thing, and I think I mentioned this to both of you, is the Hulis device. So it's a way to stimulate the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is our 10th cranial nerve, but it's the easiest access point to our parasympathetic nervous system, right? And so if we can stimulate that, and the way I know it's working is every time after I use it, I typically have a bowel movement. So I'm in the rest and digest portion of my nervous system, right? And the Hulis, I got it about maybe 3.5 months ago. And you literally take it out of the box, put the little silicone gel in it, and you apply it right here to access the vagus nerve. And it also has settings to access other nerves, but the main reason I got it was for the vagus. And the vagus activates something called the anti-inflammatory reflex. So the vagus nerve is lined with receptors for acetylcholine. So if our acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter, and any movement that we do, whether it's contracting my biceps or walking in a straight line or jogging, that requires acetylcholine. But acetylcholine is also required for the anti-inflammatory reflex. And that's one reason why, not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but coming off of benzodiazepines is very difficult because it lowers acetylcholine. So then you have glutamate high, GABA low, and then the anti-inflammatory reflex is essentially turned off. So you get massive inflammation.
Mhm.
And so the best ways, the Hoolest device, I don't have any connection to them, and it's HOOLEST. It's worked really well, and I've tried many devices. Cold face plunges. So I don't expect everyone to go out and buy a cold plunge tub, but there's many really good instructional videos on YouTube about how and the proper technique to use for the cold face plunges. And according to my friends who do dermatology, it's supposed to be really good for your skin. As a side note, make sure it's filtered water and not full of a bunch of drugs and metals and fluoride and things like that. But that can help modulate your autonomic nervous system and put you in more of that rest and digest state. And so of course, I still take supplements, and probably a lot more than the average person because I know the consequences of not doing so. But if I can get a device or have a technique that I only have to purchase once and I can use it over and over again for 15 years or whatever, 20 years, then I like that route. And it's something, it's very small. It fits in your pocket. I don't have it up here on my desk. People can carry it with them. If you're afraid of what people might think, you can, when you go in your coffee break or your bathroom break, just you literally only need to do it for 1.5 to 3 minutes and you'll feel more relaxed. I don't track my deep sleep currently, but I feel more rested when I wake up. So I think the vagus nerve, when we look at activating that and getting into more of a parasympathetic tone, a lot of people don't even realize how sympathetic fight or flight dominant they are until they start to come out of it.
Mhm.
There's a technique
Yeah.
called alpha biotics, and I don't fully understand the mechanism of it, but I've had it done probably 9 or 10 times, and I have a colleague who's trained in it. It's basically, it looks like they're going to adjust your neck, but they don't. It's just certain specific stretches, and then combining that with breath work. And my colleague said, Dr. Tim, I'm going to tell you right now, I know how you are. I know you're very type A. When you get home, you're going to be tired. Your body's going to tell you to take a nap. I know you're going to fight it. Don't fight it. And she was exactly right. I went home because I haven't taken a nap in probably several years. But when I had it done, I slept that day for like an hour and a half.
You needed
Wow.
it,
Yeah,
perhaps.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh,
Don't
I
fight
love
it.
And
I
that.
like that.
I
Yeah.
love that.
yeah,
Do you
so
do you think with any kind of like vagus nerve stimulator, I know we've talked about a couple different brands. Do you think is there any potential harm that someone could do by using one of these, or is this something pretty much anyone could test out?
so there's some CYA stuff in the literature and the booklets that come with it.
Okay.
If you just had a heart attack or stroke, if you have any implanted metal, um, I have
Mhm.
metal in my jaw from jaw surgery, but hasn't negatively impacted me. So that's the only thing I would say that's a potential cautionary measure, or if you have epilepsy,
Mhm.
potentially that could trigger it. But for the
Okay.
most part, I mean, if you look at people who are doing the implanted vagus nerve stimulators, they're curing crazy stuff like MS, Parkinson's, RA. Now, I'm not saying people should go out and get something implanted because that's pretty extreme. But the point being, if we can access the vagus nerve, it has tremendous power.
Yeah, I was going to ask you on your opinion of the efficacy from the handheld consumer device versus implantation. Because, yeah, I think not many people are going to run out and get that surgical
Yeah,
Yeah.
intervention.
And how does that
yeah.
work when it's implanted? Does it work 24/7 or like periodically? I don't know how
I
that thing
think there's different ways to set it, and depending on the
Okay.
device, you can maybe have it remotely turned on, like the doctor may do it or set it to come on every, I'm making this up, 30 minutes or every hour, for 2 minutes to help. But the issue becomes the same issue that dentists see. Well, dentists like Dr. Gene Sambataro, he recognizes that when you put metal or foreign body in your mouth, you have to test the patient's immune system to see if it's compatible. And there's a good test, there's several, but one's called the Clifford Dental Materials Test, compatibility test. And, anyone with two neurons holding hands knows that, hey, if we're going to put a foreign body in, we can't create a constant fight or flight response. And so there's a ways after that, if it's already happened, to train your immune system, but you want to always look at the compatibility of the body. So when I used to do orthopedics and I would get patients who had, say, a total knee replacement, yeah, part of it was mechanical and structural, but I know a lot of it was inflammation related. And that inflammation was likely due to huge spikes in cytokines and cortisol.
Mm.
It's a really cool option. I'm just like revisiting the notes because I remember learning about this. Like it is FDA approved for epilepsy and for depression. You insert it in a different place according to which one you're trying to trigger. But I think it is a last resort option. And also when we have solutions like that, people are still going to be motivated to jump to the solution rather than looking at, the lifestyle root causes again. So maybe you get this, but you're still not optimizing your stress response or still eating the foods that you're sensitive to, or just eating the same 5 to 6 foods that you're comfortable with, right? To reduce decision fatigue. So what else do we need to look at maybe in the diet or environment?
Yeah, so anything that causes a deviation away from homeostasis, right? So homeostasis we know to be a state of balance. So we can be in an anabolic state, homeostatic state, or a catabolic state. We want to strive for either homeostasis or an anabolic state. But as if we're working out, depending on whether or not we're supplementing with amino acids, we may briefly go into a catabolic state. And then afterwards is when our body repairs and protein synthesis occurs and things of that nature. But looking at things like EMFs, right? Ultimately, our bodies, the biochemistry is largely governed by voltage. And so if the voltage at the cell membrane is altered, nutrients can't get in and toxins can't get out. Many, in fact, most of your cellular processes are thrown off, right? And so if you think of pulsed electromagnetic field therapy, that's a positive environmental input in terms of voltage. But 5G, wireless routers, those are negative inputs. So they're negatively impacting the system. And so when we talk about doing things that can affect a whole lot of other things downstream, optimizing your voltage. And that's why if you look at like Gary Brecka and Grant Cardone in the 10 times health system, so they have 3 primary modalities. And the first one is PEMF because it primes the cells to receive the other therapies. So then when they do exercise with oxygen therapy, well, the oxygen can get utilized in the electron transport chain and oxidative phosphorylation. Oh, the red light therapy can be utilized. So I know our mutual colleague, Dr. John Lawrence, he talks about combining red light therapy with methylene blue because, the methylene blue works on complex 1 through 3. The red light therapy works on complex 4, which is cytochrome C oxidase. Sorry if I'm getting a little too scientific, but, that's kind of how it works.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
So
That's great.
yeah, so if you combine those two, you can get an even better response. So anything that can positively influence voltage, and it doesn't have to be a PEMF machine. Let's say you don't have the funds for one right now. Grounding, right? Walking barefoot outside. And, if you're in an area where it's snowing, then, you can get a grounding mat, things of that nature. And so I sleep with what's called a magnetico pad underneath my mattress. It's a 10 Gauss, and it's meant to mimic the Schumann resonance of the Earth to a degree. And so it's basically adding electrons to the body, essentially.
What is that? It's not like a sheet. It's just like a pad that goes under your
It's
sheet.
heavy. It took my
Okay.
dad and me to carry it upstairs.
Oh,
And
wow.
it was like $1,400, but it was worth it. I got it back in like 2015, I think. And it goes underneath your mattress. And so, I noticed the difference was pretty subtle at first, like just better mood and then kind of more resilient. And, obviously, if you can optimize your airway health and sleep on something like a Magnetico or a grounding pad, then that's going to help optimize your health,
Mm-hmm.
upstream from the issues you're
Yeah.
experiencing.
Yeah, I mean, I think anything you can do to optimize that the time you're in bed. Because I've also heard that we're more sensitive to EMFs when we're sleeping. I don't know if that's true with like what's going on with the lymphatic system, but it makes
Yeah,
sense that you'd want to do that.
I think that that's part of it. And I think also, the deep sleep, right? So the more EMS we're exposed to, the less deep sleep we can get. And then the less capable we are of detoxifying. And the more metals, and mycotoxins from mold that we have, the more sensitive our bodies will be to EMFs. It's basically turning
Mm-hmm.
our bodies into a large antenna. And Dr. Klinghardt talks about when mold and mycotoxins sense EMF fields, they increase their production of mycotoxins 600-fold.
Whoa.
Okay. So what else can we be doing about that? Turning off the Wi-Fi router at night, no cell phone in the bedroom. What else should we be doing?
Yeah, so I would say distance is a big thing, right? So the inverse square law. The further my phone is from me, no matter what setting I have it on, the better and healthier it's going to be for me. But also, you can buy a tri-field meter, and some of the other meters available on Amazon and online to test if the wiring, the electricity in your home may be too concentrated in an area. So it's not always 5G and Wi-Fi routers. It could be a wiring issue. When they build most homes, because they can get away with stuff, they put up the framework and it's getting rained on right away. So you already have a structure that's conducive to mold growth. And then if they take shortcuts with the wiring, it might be super concentrated in one area, and then you have humidity issues. So then you have a disaster.
Mm.
So things that you can do, there are grounding bags. I interviewed a guy who's an EMF expert, Justin Franson. It's called Athleticism Neurostacking and EMF Rocks. And he sent me
Heard of that
one,
one.
and it's amethyst crystals. And he has, I think, like 18 different doctors across the US promoting it who've tested their own sleep with it. And one of the MDs said he experienced, I think, a 40% increase in deep sleep.
Wow. With
The
the
other
EMF
thing,
Is that
rocks?
possible? What
yeah,
was his deep sleep before? 1 minute?
that's a great question. Yeah, so
40%.
I know. Well, I had something similar happen too, and I don't think you'll mind me mentioning it because he has a testimonial on my website. But Nick Penault, the EMF guy, we were able to double his deep sleep, close to double, by decreasing his viral load.
Mm,
Because with viruses, it's going to activate the microglial cells from the inflammation, and then that's going to cause insomnia.
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
There are
Here we are
also,
Interesting.
in
back at
terms of,
inflammation. Go ahead.
yeah, exactly. There are
Yeah.
also, you ladies have probably heard of Lamb's Clothing. I think
Yes.
Justin Timberlake is a spokesperson for them,
Oh,
but
he
I have some of their,
is.
Oh,
I
I
was
didn't
could
know
be
wearing the
that.
hat
mistaken, but
this morning. I feel closer to him already.
I'm 99% sure. I'll have to double check, but I know I saw it more than once, unless it was his
Cool.
doppelganger. But basically, yeah, the Lamb's Clothing, it's made out of the same stuff as a NASA astronaut suit. And they make hats, pants. I think they make sports bras for women. And that's the other
Yeah, we
thing.
travel
So
with the clothing. I really try not to go to the airport without a shirt on.
Yeah. I have
yeah,
Without a lamb shirt on. Not just
who's the naked lady at the airport?
that's
Yeah,
right.
I have the lamb's hoodie and the hat, and I feel protected with that. But I had someone message me on Instagram and they said, you knew that could be making it worse.
I've heard
What are
that from
your
several people.
what are your thoughts on that comment?
Yeah, so I had for my phone, I don't use it anymore, but Ben Greenfield recommended a Defender Shield case. And then when I
Mm.
interviewed, I was talking to Nick Penault. He said sometimes the cell phone will sense that the signal is not as strong and it will ramp up production of the signal. in an effort to better communicate with the tower.
Yeah,
Yeah.
try is
And
harder.
so, and so that's where, Justin's approach differs a little. So, his idea is that, you're never going to be able to block all the EMFs that you should. So let's try to take two waves that are incoherent and make them into a coherent wave. And theoretically, supposedly, that's what the EMF rocks and the amethyst crystals do.
Okay. Yeah, I have
Mm.
heard that idea. And circling back to what you said about the viral load, that's really interesting about the impact on deep sleep. Um, I'm like, tell me all the things about viruses. What else do I need to know and do? Is there anything you can share that you helped him with to decrease that? Does it depend on the virus? Is it overall any virus? Kind of the same deal?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're not doing the basics like getting morning sunlight, going to bed on time, then you would need to optimize those things. Avoiding, simple sugars, getting enough protein and healthy fats. Those are some of the really simple things you can do. But in general, optimizing immune function, starting with getting the lymphatic system moving. And I do that with a vibration plate. Sometimes I'll
Mm,
do dry skin brushing, but that's kind of like the information superhighway for our immune system. And so we want to keep that moving. A lot of people have symptoms that aren't going away, and you never want to kill off more than you can detoxify. And so if that garbage disposal system's already clogged, you don't want to go adding to it. You want to sort of mobilize it first. But we also used a product called Carnivora. It's from the Venus flytrap plant, and it has antiviral, antifungal, and antibacterial properties along with some immune modulating nutrients. And that, over time was able to lower his viral load and a lot of people's viral loads. And I feel stronger, like physically stronger in the gym when I'm taking it. And so it's the immune modulation to lower the viral load. And then there's a new, well, it's new to me. I haven't used it yet, but it supposedly activates all 48 to 49 nuclear receptors, and it's called metoxidol. I think it's metoxidol. It's METADICHOL. And it's supposed to so a lot of pathogens bind to the vitamin D receptor, the VDR, and then it blocks vitamin D from binding there. Supposedly, this product kicks those pathogens off that receptor. And so it's kind of, instead of focusing on one area, it's kind of looking at the system as a whole and more so the terrain.
Mm.
okay, I have to look that one up.
Yeah, that's a new one. So, I guess who should be looking into that? Is it for everyone? Are there any contraindications? I think that's such an interesting topic because we can look at vitamin D on a lab test and see it's low and then just say like, let's supplement with vitamin D rather than being curious about the inflammation that's driving it down. Who is
Right.
that for?
Yeah, so I'm not aware of any contraindications. Now, I know if you do have a high pathogen load, you want to start slowly because of Herxheimer type reactions.
Sure.
Um, but with vitamin D, a lot of times we only check the 25 hydroxy.
Mm-hmm.
But if the 25 hydroxy is low, many times the 1,25 hydroxy will be elevated
Yep.
because they're hyper converting 25 hydroxy into the 1,25 hydroxy. And that's
Mm-hmm.
why people can feel worse on vitamin D. But other things that can lead to low vitamin D on a lab test, low magnesium, low boron. And so all those things factor in. And, we also need to keep in mind you don't want to take D3 without K2. I tell people try to get morning sun. Yes, we're getting vitamin D from it, but we're getting so much more from the photons, the red lights, the mitochondrial improvements, the hormonal inputs. All of those are super important. But I just learned a couple of weeks ago about the metoxidol, and it sounds promising. Apparently, it's been out since like 2015 or 2016, but for some reason I hadn't heard of it until recently. And so, that can certainly help. But in terms of optimizing overall the terrain, we want to look at body temperature as well. And body temperature, we immediately think thyroid, and that's oftentimes the case. whether it's elevated thyroid antibodies or low free T3. For every, I think it's 0.3 of a degree, our body temperature goes down from 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. The decrease in immune function is like 20% or something. It's a crazy number. And so
Wow.
that's why, if you think about a lot of the European clinics where they use hyperthermia treatments, where you're partially anesthetized because they take you up to around 106 degrees Fahrenheit, that is essentially what we're doing. Because when you get in the sauna and you feel better, part of it, yeah, you're detoxifying, but you're also increasing your immune function, your natural killer cell levels, and you're playing whack-a-mole with the bugs. And so when our core body temperature is low, one of my mentors used to say, you can't kill your way to health. And what he meant by that is, at some point you have to look at the terrain.
Yeah. So like, should our body temperature be 98.6?
So it'll
Like,
deviate slightly. For females, it's going to deviate based on your cycle.
right.
But yeah, if you go to a traditional allopathic doctor or provider, let's say your temperature is 98.1, they're going to say, good job. Everything looks great. But that's simply not the case. It's kind of like oxygen saturation, right? They might say, oh, well, your levels didn't drop below 94. Well, so our cellular level hypoxia is the cause of a lot of disease. Going from 94 to 99 can be the difference between a good quality of life and a really poor quality of life.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so I tell people, look at things like gut health, because a lot of your T4 inactive thyroid hormone is converted into T3 in the gut. And so if you have something like SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, if it's the hydrogen dominant variant, that can downregulate body temperature. And so it can be other things besides the thyroid, and even improving mitochondrial health will help, because you got more ATP. You're going to have more energy to go around and work on all these physiological reactions.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about mitochondria.
Interesting.
Did you have something else, Renee?
No, I'm just like mind blown about this temperature thing. I've never heard anyone really talk about it in that way. Cause like my first half of my cycle, it's like 96.5. And then the second half is like 97.5. So for me, like a fever is like 98.9. That's like a fever
Yes.
for me. So
Yeah.
I've never really heard anyone talk about this.
Yeah, it's a great point, because a lot of times, so when my body temperature used to be really low, I would go and I could tell. I mean, I was sitting in the air conditioned room and I would have sweat dripping down my forehead. But then I would go to, urgent care or somewhere, and they'd be like, oh, you don't have a fever? I'm like, no, you don't understand. My baseline temperature is like 96. So 97.4 is a fever.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
it's
how I
extremely
am.
important, because the principle is this, and it's really simple. But there are only two ways to change the function of a protein: change the temperature or change the pH. So if we change the temperature, it's altering the functionality of that protein.
Okay. Food for thought.
So other than getting the body really hot, like something through sauna, is that the number one strategy? What else would you put in that category?
Yeah, so the sauna, things like the biomat or infrared mats, can be helpful. Improving circulation, which the saunas can also do. But also making sure, that you don't have a ton of gut issues like SIBO, which can lower body temperature. And then looking at other hormonal markers, like obviously all the thyroid markers, but also testosterone. So testosterone can cause an increase in body temperature. It impacts, if I remember correctly, steps 2 and 3 in the Krebs cycle. So we're going to produce more ATP. And so it'll help, not to the extent that thyroid will, but it will help somewhat to raise your body temperature. And so doing that, and then the cell danger response, not to go too far down that rabbit hole, but basically our mitochondria can be in one of two states, and it's produce ATP and have optimal health, or the cell danger response, which is telling us that we're under some sort of threat or stressor. And that can be literally anything from mold to metals to pathogens to psychological stress. And Ari Whitman and I talked about this when I interviewed him, but the cell danger response becomes active within 3 to 5 minutes of experiencing a major psychological stressor. And it doesn't have to be like a car accident. It could just be you got in an argument with a significant other or relative. And so when the cell danger response is active, body temperature can also go down.
Interesting.
Okay.
And so again, I guess the opportunity is make sure you have some recovery, or make sure you like take a little pause or a chill out, right? We can't just expect that these triggers are never going to happen.
Right. Absolutely. And that's where also, reframing, cognitive restructuring, changing the way you perceive things, and also some adaptogenic support, and things like CBD to calm the, endocannabinoid system, which is going to help calm the nervous system. So one thing for the listeners is our nervous system, our immune system, and our endocrine system share a lot of the same receptors. So when one of them is impacted, ultimately all three will be impacted.
So
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on like mitochondrial support supplements? It seems like there's kind of a mixed review on these. Yay, nay?
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say, if you don't eliminate, the stressors, especially the psychological stressors, they may not have much benefit to you, or you may think that they just don't work. But even when they do work, so if we look at things like NAD, that's adding premium gasoline into the Lamborghini. But if the Lamborghini's engine is broken, it won't work. And that's where methylene blue comes in. So methylene blue helps to rebuild the engines, and so does something called NT factor energy. It's a supplement full of phospholipids, and it helps reconstitute fatty acids in the mitochondrial membrane. It's based on the work of a guy named Dr. Garth Nicholson, and he studied people with chronic fatigue syndrome and Gulf War syndrome. And it takes about a year to displace, some of the environmental toxins we're exposed to lodge themselves into the mitochondrial membrane. So supplementing with NT factor energy, and it's kind of like creatine where you do a loading phase, for 1 to 2 months, and then you go on a maintenance dose. So it's not something that's going to hit you like methylene blue or NAD, but I would say the NT factor energy combined with methylene blue. I know you guys spoke with Dr. Lariance about the methylene blue, so I won't talk too much about that.
That's my favorite. It's one of my favorite topics. So.
Yeah, we can go there. Actually, I want to know your opinion. I had a friend that just sent me, I need to do a little deeper discovery, sent me a reel of some doctor on Instagram saying, I don't know about methylene blue. It stains your brain, and I don't want my brain to be blue.
Yeah, so there's a lot out there. I mean, obviously Google is going to filter, most of the helpful results these days.
Yeah.
But, with the methylene blue, a lot of people think that it can only, sorry if we can edit that out. Someone just rang my doorbell.
Yeah, I didn't hear
I
it.
didn't know. I thought,
Didn't hear
tell
it.
if you heard it. But the methylene blue, one contraindication is being on an SSRI, right? And so, there may be truth to that. There may not be. I've known people, other doctors who were on a low dose of an SSRI and still took methylene blue. Full disclosure, I'm not promoting that, but I'm just saying it may not be as big of an issue as we think. But it also has
I would agree at low doses. The MAOI is not as risky. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it has wonderful antimicrobial properties, right? So I love supplements that do multiple things. And, if we look at stealth pathogens like Bartonella, for example, which is a co-infection that goes with Lyme, methylene blue is active against that. And so if we can, knock the pathogen level down and repair our calories of our cells, then that's a 2-for-1 deal that I'll take every day of the week and twice on Sundays. I got an IV methylene blue before, and that's so it can drop. Well, when it's combined with EBU, which is a type of ozone, it can drop blood sugar. And the morning that I got it, I'd eaten a low carb breakfast, eggs and sausage, And I had the Ebu combined with methylene blue. I was at my friend's clinic and they're like, oh, get him some crackers, get him some juice, get the oxygen. I kind of,
Oh,
but that was on me.
Some
I'd
fruit
forgot.
snacks, quick.
Yeah, exactly. But overall, I think the methylene blue is great. I do know that there was some discussion with Dr. Nathan Bryan about it possibly inhibiting nitric oxide production. And then I think Dr. Chris Masterjohn came out with I think it was a Substack or Reddit thread on, the pluses and minuses of methylene blue. So, if you have ischemic heart disease, methylene blue may not be the best. But I would argue personally that, if I had ischemic heart disease, I would work on getting chelation and vitamin K2 and magnesium, supplementing with nitric oxide support and methylene blue, because ultimately the heart is one of the most mitochondrially dense organs that we have. So if we can improve mitochondrial function, we will improve cardiac output, which should be about 5 liters per minute.
All right. I'm going to go take methylene blue after this.
Absolutely.
I love it. Every time that I've been sick, COVID or whatever, jet lag, really just feeling under, that is the thing that brings me back to my baseline quicker than anything else.
And
self-reported N of 1, but I feel amazing.
What type of dosing?
Renee, actually, you'll know better. I'll do half of a Transcriptions troche, which is
8 milligrams. Are you talking about just blue or blue canatine?
Just blue.
Just blue, yeah, it's 16 for 1 troche. So you're only doing 8, which
is a very low dose. That's well under the therapeutic dose for my body weight, right?
Right.
Yeah. And
That's
I'll either do a whole Transcriptions, the 16, and I feel same thing. It's like one of the few supplements that I immediately feel totally better.
Yeah.
And then if I do Dr. John's product, I'll just do like a quarter. Because I think even a quarter is still like 30 or something. It's so potent. What do you think about dissolving it in your cheek, like the buccal troche, versus through the gut? Like I know Dr. John says you got to go through the gut. Do you have any opinion on that?
Yeah. So I have some that compounded or got compounded at my friend's compounding pharmacy, and I experienced good results with it. The dose isn't nearly as high as what I had IV, obviously, or IV is going to be a lot stronger. But I think, it's water soluble, so it's going to be well absorbed pretty much anyway. But, if you're experiencing good benefits with the buccal troche, then I would say it's definitely working because you're bypassing some of the GI tract. I haven't researched this, but my hunch is that it may have some antimicrobial properties on the gut, if there are pathogens there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It makes sense to me too.
Yeah. I try to mix it up. It just depends on whether I'm okay with a blue tongue for the day.
That's how I decide. I'm like, who am I going to see today?
Right.
Yeah. Sometimes better to swallow it.
But as far as the mitochondrial support supplements, the NT Factor Energy, CoQ10. So a lot of people don't know that CoQ10 is the rate limiting factor in ATP production. So if it's low and you take NAD, which can be pretty expensive, you may not notice any benefits. So getting CoQ10 up, it's not as sexy or new age as some of the other stuff, but it's every bit as important, if not more important. I also love molecular hydrogen. I have an AquaCure machine where I breathe the Brown's gas and I drink the water. But it's really small. The molecular hydrogen, it can get into the mitochondria. It can repair damage to the mitochondria that's already transpired, and it can stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis. And again, it's one of those things. I think I paid for this machine like 2,500 or 2,600. But if I was doing the tablets initially, and that's costing me like $80 a month. So I could, after a year, I could have just bought a machine.
Those go fast.
Yeah. And it has so much research on it. Now, most of it's been done in Asian countries because they're just looking for the truth. It's less influenced. Their research is less influenced by big pharma. And so, they've studied a lot, and mine, I have a pair of goggles that connects to my machine. I haven't used them yet, But the guy who came up with my machine, George Wiseman, he wore glasses from the time he was like 8 years old until like 60. And then he did an hour of therapy every day with the goggles on for 8 months, and he no longer needs glasses.
Cool.
Huh.
That's
That's a
And
cool
cool.
biohack. Yeah. Never heard of that.
yeah, the molecular hydrogen, I mean, it has
Wow.
so many uses, from exercise recovery to sports performance enhancement. And to be clear, I'm not referring to anabolic steroids when I say performance enhancement. I'm just referring to, doing things with our lifestyle and nutrition that can improve our day-to-day performance. And so the molecular hydrogen, I know of colleagues who used it to get over Lyme, to get over COVID, because it mitigates those cytokine storms, the inflammatory cascades. It can be used to help with literally anything that is a deviation away from homeostasis. And so, whether it's Parkinson's, whether it's another neurological disorder, cardiovascular disease, because ultimately there's an inflammatory component to almost everything. And so, if we can help to mitigate that and improve the functioning of the mitochondria, then our health is going to benefit.
Hmm. And oxidative stress, right?
Uh,
Hydrogen acts on the redox pathway, and that's a huge underlying cause of all those things you just mentioned.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the molecular hydrogen, I would say that's probably one of my favorites. And then the red light therapy devices as well. Um, and the sauna. So, the sauna we don't necessarily think of as directly targeting the mitochondria, but if we're getting rid of toxins and we're improving body temperature and improving our immune function, then the mitochondria will serve to benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Supporting the body's natural healing abilities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Such a great stack.
Since we've talked about some novel ingredients, I'm curious about your opinion, especially because you talked about acetylcholine, about nicotine and affecting the nicotinic receptors for supporting the vagus nerve and supporting inflammation. Do you have an opinion or experience with that supplementation?
So I know colleagues who've microdosed with it, and I think it could definitely be beneficial. I think it's kind of a case by case basis. I know that's not a good answer, but if you have addiction issues that run your family, things like that. I mean, typically with the low doses that you would be using for brain health and cognition and inflammation, it's not going to run the risk of addiction. It could, but it's unlikely. And so I think it has great potential benefits as a nootropic or cognition enhancer. I personally haven't tried it. And so have you ladies tried it?
Renee
I'm
is a big fan
I'm
of
chewing it right.
nicotine. Yeah.
Chewing it right now.
For energy, for chronic fatigue, but also
Yeah.
as a nootropic. But I'm just really curious about its effect on the vagus nerve. And I've learned from my mentor that a lot of cigarette smokers actually have vagus nerve and gut dysfunction. That's actually why they're drawn to the nicotine, because it serves as a kind of a pacifier for the vagus nerve. Obviously,
Yeah.
that's not a clean source. We can get cleaner nicotine in much lower doses.
Right.
Oh
Like
yeah.
the Lucy gum. Yeah, this is only
Yeah.
four milligrams versus a cigarette is like 12 milligrams, along
Okay.
with all the other toxins. Well, and
Does it keep you up if you do it too late in the day?
it doesn't.
Metabolizes so quickly.
So
Okay.
I really like it for like if after dinner, eat dinner at like 6. If after dinner I got to sit down and get some work done, like about an hour of work, I'll pop a piece of the 4 milligram nicotine gum and I can knock everything out, and then I'm still in bed at 10 and I fall asleep fine. And then I
Okay.
also like it as like an alcohol alternative. If I'm out with friends and I don't want to drink, I just have a piece of nicotine gum and you get like that same euphoric feeling. Doesn't trash your HRV and your sleep like alcohol does. And I've actually been testing out the nicotine with the N of 1 app. I still need to collect more data, but overall it's showing that nicotine potentially has a positive impact on my sleep.
I would think it
Wow.
would if it's supporting your vagus nerve. That makes
Okay.
sense to me. And I feel the same.
Yeah.
It doesn't affect my sleep. And when I was performing on Broadway, when I had evening shows, like I would start work at 8 p.m., which is just insane. Everyone would come in with their like venti iced coffee. I'm like, there's no way I'm sleeping drinking that coffee. I would do nicotine. It would get me just through the 2.5 hours of work, and then I could go home and go to sleep.
Absolutely. Yeah. You brought up a great question. I've never thought of nicotine because I haven't researched it a ton. I just know some cursory stuff about it, but yeah, theoretically, it should be able to benefit the vagus nerve. One thing I wanted to mention also is that smokers are typically deficient in norepinephrine. And
Mm,
so if you look at the medications that treat nicotine addiction, like buprenorphine, it is a selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. So it's that hit of norepinephrine that they're getting. And then norepinephrine, if you have enough copper and vitamin C and not too much C. diff in your gut, will get converted into dopamine. And so they're trying to get, some people will get their dopamine hit from looking at their phone every 5 seconds. Some people will get it from food. Some people will get it from illicit drug use. But I mean, it sounds like the dosages that you ladies are using are well within the therapeutic range and are very unlikely to cause any sort of damage.
yeah, most
Okay.
likely. And I think
Okay.
just to come full circle, if there's like a norepinephrine or dopamine deficiency, or you're cycling really quickly, it's probably because you're eating something inflammatory in your diet, or you have poor stress resilience, right? Like we're not converting properly. And then we
Right.
take these medications. So
Mhm.
good way to circle back to that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, if people are doing vagus nerve stimulation exercises, by the way, the humming, the gargling, those are kind of like add-ons, like icing on the cake, if you
Yeah.
already have a pretty healthy vagus nerve. If you
Hmm.
have significant autonomic dysfunction, those will not get you out of the woods.
Yeah.
Um, at the same time, if you're using a device like, let's say, the Hulist, and it's not working, it could be because you're low in acetylcholine. And unfortunately, even the labs that test the neurotransmitter, the urine neurotransmitter metabolites, I don't. I think there's one, Saber Sciences, but it's kind of expensive, that test acetylcholine levels. So I have people just try either huperzine A, CDP choline, or cytocholine,
Hmm.
phosphatidylcholine, which there are certain polymorphisms. There's one called MTHFD1 that affects our body's ability to produce choline, and that's going to affect the integrity of the cell membranes, which, if this is a cell and this is a cell and they can't talk to each other, even though they might be healthy outside of that, if they can't communicate, it doesn't really matter how healthy internally they are.
Mm.
Mm. Yeah. I think I have that variant.
I think I do too. Trying
Oh,
to
Yeah.
wow.
remember like what led me, like I take alpha GPC. There was a reason for that. I'm like trying to backtrack, remember if that was it.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had a couple
Yeah.
genetic reports recommend like PC products. And so maybe that, I don't know, something else to look into. So much food for
Yeah.
thought today. Thank
Oh my
you.
gosh,
I know.
so
Absolutely.
much. Can we do a quick zoom out so people are not feeling overwhelmed? If if someone is struggling with energy, hormone dysfunction, if there is a sense that there's chronic inflammation, I know that's such a big topic, but what are some really simple lifestyle strategies that you would start with for anyone out of the gate? It could be a repetition from things we already talked about.
Morning sunlight, I sound like a broken record, but there's no supplement or IV or gadget you can get. I mean, even the best gadgets, Molly Eastman and I talked about this, the Chroma D and the Spurdy, they replicate like 10 to 12% of the sun. So don't be lulled into thinking that if you go outside and the sun's not bright and shiny, that you're not getting any benefits. Dr. Andrew Huberman talks about you have to stay out longer and you won't get quite the benefits, but you're still getting some. And you need
Mm-hmm.
to get your ASS outside anyways. We spend 90 to 95% of our time indoors. Get outside anyways. So that's going to bed on time. And, people, when I wear blue blockers, like I get asked to present, my first question is, can I wear my blue blockers? Because if the answer is no, then I can't present. Like it affects me that much. And,
Mm.
I think different people are sensitive on different levels. But I mean, I'm very sensitive to the point that my next day, I'll essentially be non-productive. And so going to bed on
Same.
time, you don't have to go from, if you're going to bed at 11:30, obviously going to 9 p.m. is going to be a little drastic. So work back 15 minutes every 3 or 4 days, or even 5 days. Work on that because that controls the transcription essentially of 300 plus genes in our body. So remember, everything happens in a cycle, a 24-hour cycle, a yearly cycle, and other cycles. And so get outside, get some sun, get your feet on the ground if you can, walk barefoot, and that's going to help with inflammation, and go to bed on time. Those are free. And then the face dunks, the cold plunges for the face, that can help to activate your vagus nerve, and that's going to decrease your aggravation.
Love
Yeah.
it. It may be a little aggravating at first, but for good cause.
Long-term less aggravation. Yeah.
Exactly. And you don't
Yeah.
have to get in a tub and have people pour ice on you. So it's much more, it's a lot easier to get people to be compliant, essentially.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Actually, I haven't tried the face thing. That's a little bit easier, maybe.
It makes my heart rate go up a little bit. It's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
I prefer the hand and the foot dunk.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But I do think the face is a little bit better for vagus nerve specifically.
Yeah. I interviewed, Dr. Tom Seeger from Morozco. And, he talked about how what got him into cold therapy, cold plunging, was his PSA was elevated. And at first he was doing his workout and then cold plunging, and his testosterone went from 300 and something to 600 and something. So a pretty good increase. But then he switched it up and he started cold plunging and then lifting weights, and it went to 1100 and something. And his primary care thought he was on steroids.
Whoa.
Wow.
Okay.
That's wild.
The men listening just perked up.
Yeah.
When I do cold plunge before strength training, and I know this because I use the ARX when I go to my parents' house, which is quantified, I am way stronger. I'm not measuring my testosterone, but my strength potential goes up. So makes sense.
That's awesome. I know Renee, I mean, you practically have to pull her out of the cold plunge tub. Like I heard, you're not supposed to spend more than like 12 minutes a week.
She just won't get out of there.
I know.
Yeah.
I'm actually in there.
Obsessed.
I'm in right now. You can't tell.
That could be your new Zoom filter. You just make it look like water's all around.
We're doing that. That's the best idea.
Oh my gosh.
Hey, that's what I'm here for, ladies, to give you content ideas.
I'm already thinking about Halloween costume ideas for next year. Something about a cold plunge.
Definitely a cold plunge.
That's awesome.
Oh man.
Yeah. You know me well.
All right, we got one more question for you.
Yeah, let's wrap it up. Dr. Tim, if you can just leave our audience with one final tip, something they should start doing today.
Get outside, even if it's not sunny, and walk barefoot. Temporary discomfort trumps long-term pain.
Great. I'm going to do that. It's noon out west. I'm going to go for a nice midday walk. See if I can.
Yeah, sorry, Renee. I'm going to have to delay our call after this. I got to go for a walk because Dr. Tim said.
Yeah,
that's right.
We can walk and talk.
Exactly right.
We can walk and
talk.
I like it. I love it.
Yeah.
Dr. Tim, tell our audience where they can find more of you.
Yeah, so my website is healyourbody.org, which is .org. And on Instagram, it's at Dr. Tim Jackson.
Right.
Perfect.
We will link to that in the show notes. Amazing.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all your amazing knowledge with us. So grateful for you.
And thank you for the humor.
Yeah, I try to mix it up because, I used to be I'm still type A, but I used to be like, okay, we can't joke. No, we got to talk about the electron transport chain and G protein coupled receptors. We got to be super serious. And I realized, I can get 10 times more done if I'm relaxed.
Totally.
But thank you, ladies, for the work that you're doing. Thanks for having me on. You asked very, very great questions.
Thank you. Pleasure to chat. And thanks to everyone who tuned in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.